Well, I'm gonna make my video about Sanshiro right now. There's so much to say about this book and also kind of nothing to say because it speaks totally for itself. It stands on its own like an image someone might select for a haiku. I tremble before the great works of the great Soseki and am rendered almost speechless. Hello, everybody. To the person who commented that my HDR is on, I don't know how to turn it off. I'm running iPhone 16 Pro with iOS 26.3.1. This morning I finished reading Sanshirō, and here is my little video about it. I've been reading Soseki for a little over a year now, and every time I finish one, I think, how am I going to talk about this? How am I going to describe the pleasure I felt reading it, all that I got from it? There's no way I could possibly do that. There's too much to say. But I'm going to try. What I'm going to do is just proceed from one thing to the next, like from one thing that I know I can share to the next thing that I know I can share, even if that's just sort of a mundane fact, and then cease the video as soon as I have nothing more to share. Yeah, my tagline for Soseki in general is, I can't believe this. Here are the two copies of Sanshiro that I own. They're both translated by Rubin. They were published in different times. I started reading it in this copy, switched to this copy, and finished it in this copy. This earlier edition of Sanshiro was first published in 1977 by University of Washington Press. This is a Perigee edition. And then this, Sanshiro, was published in 2009. The author revised the translation for this volume and made a couple of, there are some improvements that are non-trivial that are really great about this new version. I have been looking for Soseki books ever since I've grown and become infatuated with him, and I saw this lot of 5 books in this uniform edition for like $40 on eBay, and I just jumped at the chance, even though we all know that this is an economy where you're not supposed to be doing things like that all that often. The lot included all 3 books from the trilogy that inaugurated the period of Soseki's writing that kind of cemented his reputation, or so it may seem to some. There's Sanshiro and The Gate. The Wayfarer, which was a book I checked out of the library, but then thought, hey, this gives me a chance to like own my own copy, is the same typesetting and translator and edition as what I checked out of the library, just in a paperback format. And then Light and Darkness, the his unfinished last novel. Having acquired these, I thought, okay, well, I'll start with Sanshiro, chronologically the first of all these books. It was time for me to read it. I had already read The Gate here, and so I thought, why not go back to Sanshiro and try to read this trilogy here? This is not a book about the trilogy, it's really just a book about one volume in it, but I'm just sort of trying to tell you about how I got to this book over here. And in this paperback format of the 1977 translation by Rubin, I had a magical experience of this book's masterful first chapter. This first chapter that's just like unbelievably delightful, and like I want to invoke Kafka's name just for the edge of your seat quality and the simplicity of how the story proceeds, and yet how beautiful it is in terms of image. I already have a nostalgia for my experience of the early chapters of the book in this edition. When I look back at where I started, I feel like I've come a long way. That's a criterion that I use to decide whether a novel was good or not, whether it feels like I went a long way or not. So one day I was out behind the wheel, and my sweet passenger, was reading to me from this edition, and I thought, hey, we're close to Barnes & Noble, and I happen to know that they have a copy of Sanshiro so in the new edition, so why don't I go get that? I'll get one that I can treat roughly or not be so precious about, and it'll be nice. I'll have this nice new copy. It has a Haruki Murakami introduction. It has a really great chronology. Take this entry for 1907, for instance, where Nowaki is called Much Ranting About the Rich. You get this detail that his 200 yen a month monthly salary was higher than the editor-in-chief's. There was feverish marketing of like merch for one of his novels from that year. These details are not standard in chronologies. Like, this is a good chronology. In addition to the Murakami introduction, it's also got a translator's note, where Rubin says, I have probably spent more time reworking the text for this edition in my mid-60s than I did for the original translation. So there are lots of corrections. And then the change that I think I thought about most about that between this edition and the new one is that this one has indications of the demarcations of where each serialized bit starts and ends. He's basing on this the complete works that was published by Iwanami Shoten, who, a publishing house whose name was, I think, largely made by the fact that Soseki's later books were published with them and that his complete works were published with them. And in that text, it breaks between the newspaper installments. And though the present translation does not go so far as to number each section, the breaks are indicated here with the symbol little asterisk. I'll say more about the segmentation into those serialized bits in a second, but I also want to mention that the notes are nice too. The notes are well done. Basically what I mean is every time I went back to the notes, it was worth my time. It wasn't that thing of when you go into the back of a Penguin Classic and you look at the note and you're like, why did I waste my time with that? It doesn't really contribute much to my understanding of the text. While I'm glancing at the notes, before I forget, one of the many pleasures of reading Sanshiro is like the way intertextual connections are made, the way Sanshiro, starting at this school, is encountering text as being loaned texts and such, and they're always just really fun to encounter. They always feel like alien entities that contribute a lot. I'm pointing at this history of intellectual development when I say that, but there's also the Sir Thomas Browne book that shows up later that's really important. And the frankness with which people say, like, I don't really understand that part of Sir Thomas Browne, or I don't understand what hydriotaphia means, that's really charming. So when you look at chapter 1 here, no breaks, a solid substance, or a seamless substance. But when you look at chapter 1 here, look at these lovely little asterisks where you get to have the experience of encountering the next installment like you're receiving the newspaper, like you're receiving or purchasing Asahi Shimbun, and you're like, oh my gosh, here's the new bit of a Soseki novel. What a privilege that must have been, to be a subscriber or to buy that and then get freaking parts of Soseki novels. So those are some of the improvements that you see in this edition of Sanshiro, this reissue, this revised translation. In the course of reading this and just enjoying this book and its reading this book and its appurtenances, I got really into J. Rubin. Well, I'm not obsessed, but it's a name that I'm going to never forget, I guess, in translation. I made this little table of other things based on Wikipedia that he translated by Soseki. We have The Miner, which is a novel from right before Sanshiro. That's part of this kind of group of works that he was publishing right when he was starting to serialize stuff, where he'd already had really cool successes in the comedic vein and in the poetic vein with Botchan and also Kusamakura. But you have these three that weren't received nearly as well as Sanshiro was. And so I'm really fascinated. I haven't read any of those. They kind of form a little extremely unofficial trilogy in my mind as like just curious novels that are going to be really fun to encounter. And then also he translated Murakami. A lot of people probably have read his Wind Up Bird Chronicle translation, his Norwegian Wood translation. Now, I haven't read any of these except for the start of After Dark. I made a little list down here of books that he translated that I'm really excited by. And I really want to read his After Dark because the little bit of After Dark I read by Murakami like made me a Murakami fan. And of course, The Miner, as I've mentioned, a lot of people that I know have been reading this Hardboiled Wonderland at the end of the world and the end of the world. Of course, in his translation, it's like the end of the world and the Hardboiled Wonderland. And that's one that I really would like to have. Actually, like this morning, I went to the bookstore and sort of picked it up and looked at it. And it's in one of those nice hardcover Everyman's Library editions. So I'm going to be looking out for that. And then also Akutagawa has this book of Akutagawa stories called Rashomon and 17 other stories that he also translated that I happen to know is like a Penguin Deluxe edition or something. I would love to grab that. But I already have this other edition of Rashomon and other stories, this early Tuttle edition that I found like at a used thing for real cheap, because it's not in the best of shape, but it's also very charming. Of course, those Kafka books Does anyone ever like mention Murakami and say Kafka when they mean Murakami just because he has the book Kafka on the Shore? Anyway, the only Murakami book I have outside of Strange Library is Kafka on the Shore. Sorry for the focus. Oh my gosh, so I need to acquire these other ones that I'm interested in. J. Rubin received his PhD at the University of Chicago, and William F. Sibley was a professor of East Asian languages and civilizations at the University of Chicago. I went to the University of Chicago, so like I'm starting to feel like a Soseki pride. I feel like a more university pride than I've ever felt knowing that these translators are associated with my school. So, serialization of Sanshiro took place from the 1st of September to the 9th of December in 1908 in the paper I mentioned earlier, Asahi Shimbun, and then it was published in May the following year in book form. I don't really know if when it was first published in book form it had like little asterisks for or whatever for the bits that were serialized. But this is a book that's kind of early, from an earlier on in this period of serializing great works. So then he serialized And Then, The Gate, To the Spring Equinox and Beyond. Thax still has my copy of that. I'm going to link in the description of to that video where I loan it to Thax. No rush, Thax, but I would like to get that back. Because some of these books are not easy to find. One of the things that I don't like one of the things that's kind of like it's like a love-hate relationship with the Soseki books is that some of them are darn easy to find, like, for instance, Kokoro, and then some of them are, like, really just inaccessible, like Nowaki, or, or To the Spring Equinox and Beyond, or any of these ones I found here, like Grass on the Wayside, like, all of these books are kind of difficult to come by. So I've talked about how I came to this book, a little bit about the translator, features of this new edition. I've talked a little bit about where it is in the author's formidable, tremble-inducing body of work. Yeah, like trembling and fear and trembling. I feel like I have a fear of Soseki like some Christians have a fear of God. Before I stop talking about the book as a fetish object, I just want to mention that I joined this r/Natsume Soseki that only has 15 weekly visitors. Actually, that's up by 5 from what it was when I joined it, actually. And I made this little post of all my collection of Soseki's novels in English, and I posted pictures of my collection, including this batch of uniform editions. And this is before I really read Sanshiro much, or before I had finished reading it, so you can see that the edges of the book like aren't really worn off. This is the kind of thing which, to talk about it, like totally disqualifies me as anyone talking about this book as literature, because it really becomes clear that I'm just talking about books as fetish objects. But you can see like this book rubbed off on the corners when I was reading it. I was being hyperbolic and cute and annoying when I said that it disqualifies me from talking about the book. One last thing I'll say is that I used an Omni card as my bookmark. Omni cards aren't necessary anymore because you can just tap your credit card to use to use the trains in New York City. But last time I was there, I didn't know that, and I bought an Omni card, and this marked me as a total yokel. So I thought this would be a good thematic choice for a bookmark in Sanshiro. Wow, I've said so much prefatory stuff that I'm kind of worn out already. Sometimes little serialization breaks come in the middle of conversations, which feels kind of cool and paradigms shifting inside my own mind for like what a cliffhanger can be. Dialogue in this book is just generally so good, and it feels so real, and Mineko feels so real, and Yojiro is not just a laughingstock, even though he's like a buffoon in certain ways. Every character, as in every Soseki novel, is allowed to be many different things. The two main engines of drama in this book, really, the relationship of Sanshiro to Mineko, oh my gosh, and the relation, wow, there's so many dramatic engines. Really, I think something else that defines Soseki is that by the time I get to the end of the book, I'm in suspense about all the different little strands. Every character's concerns are of great importance to me by the end of these books, and it's just remarkable to me how it's achieved every time I read one of these books. But the dramatic engines of Sanshiro's relationship with Mineko, and then Yojiro's trying to meddle with the hiring decision by getting everybody to rally behind certain candidates and reject others, are both so beautiful. It's a cozy book too. It's a cozy book. Fans of Botchan will really like the way mail is handled in this book, the way mail arrives. Yeah, the way letters arrive, long and short. And that's the main point that I think most people talking about this book will say at the start, which is that it is for fans of Kokoro and it is for fans of Botchan. And in the translator's note, he says that any student he recommended Sanshiro to, like when J. Rubin was teaching at Harvard or something, would respond well to it. And I think it really is a great introduction. You get all of the emotional stuff from like the gate or whatever, but you get so many laugh lines and like really deep, just like satisfying bone deep humor that never leaves the book the whole time. Like even as things are ratcheting up in suspense and confrontations between Crusher and Crushy are getting more and more intense, the humor never leaves the book. It's just really astounding. Look at the gorgeousness of just the prose itself. This was the hour when the depths of the great Zalkova tree outside the high, narrow windows began to turn black. Inside the hall, the faces of the students and the lecturer were equally indistinct, which made everything somehow mystical, like eating a bean jam bun in the dark. It's like you're constantly being given like concrete detail that would make any sort of Raymond Carverite weep, and then also just lovely abstract poetic images and statements that would also make like Ashbery weep. You know, it's like you're reading Kafka and Basho at the same time. It's just so really good. I think Kafka is misleading because Kafka is like really like reality is stretched and reality isn't really adhered to, and it's more like the reality of the dream a lot of the times. But it feels apt because Kafka is the only other writer I've read recently who just totally takes you by the hand without condescension and just guides you in a friendly way through the best imagined literature you can possibly imagine. Also read this book if you're interested in what the pressure of light is. There are multiple examples in this book of people talking about how good art has nothing sticking out. You know, it has like a kind of low contrast. Nothing sticking out makes it so like you don't reject any piece of the work as being too low contrast or something. This is almost a spoiler, but I don't think it really is. This his use of color is very stylish. It's rather chic. It's almost too cleverly done. Now I see why he confessed he could never do a painting that plops like a drum. Plops like a drum? What kind of painting is that? It's one that's pleasantly half-witted, like the plop of a little no drum. An interesting sort of painting. I think like that's a good description of why Soseki's novels work so well, is that nothing in them just sort of plops like a drum. There's this kind of unified quality where every detail and character is respected, and this uniformity creates this sort of like kind of unified reality that feels really immersive, at least to this reader. And that also might account for why some people are kind of bored by some Soseki books. Like I know in my Reddit, like in comments on my Reddit post or whatever, people were saying that they don't like Grass on the Wayside, or they were bored by they were bored by something. They were bored by something wild. Like they were bored by And Then or something. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. I can't really adequately describe the goodness of any like one aspect of this book. I kind of just have to rave about it. It's like my little video on Antonio Tabucci where I like just kind of said, this is great, and I'm not going to talk about it. You know, every so often I get a book like that, or find an author like that. I mean, it's very rare to find an author like that where this experience is just constantly being delivered to you, consistently delivered to you. Happy reading, everybody, and thanks for watching. What you watch when you watch it. Walk a long way today, and then stretch your feet out and rest your feet.